Good evening, everybody, and you're watching the live Monica Makes It Happen Facebook show. We always talk about rent, and we talk about your rent. Now, I have some bad news, but I also have good news. We are here for you. The bad news is that rent is on the rise in New York City. More than 2 million tenants living in rent-stabilized apartments, that's who we're talking about, will now face the biggest rent hike they've seen since 2013. Now, the good news is we have a lawyer, we have an expert here to take your questions live. We always want to bring you the resources and the correct information to help you through these hard times. The news is it comes from the Rent Guidelines Board. They voted to increase the rent to 3.25% for 1-year leases and 5% for 2-year leases. Now, that's a lot of money when you're on a fixed income. A lot of families we talk to, they need their repairs. They are on fixed incomes. This could be catastrophic for our city. And a lot of people are saying we're not being dramatic. They're very upset about this. With all the information that you need to know, let's hear from Katie Corrado, one of my colleagues. Take a look.
The cries of angry tenants drowning out the voices of the Rent Guidelines Board members during its heated meeting to decide rent increases. Both tenant members of the board expressed outrage.
People who think that investments deserve more respect and basic human needs.
But despite their protests, the board voted to allow landlords to increase rent for rent-stabilized apartments by 3.25% for 1-year leases and 5% for 2-year leases.
The motion fails by a vote of...
Before the meeting, tenants rallied against the hike, arguing that inflation, pandemic hardships, and the current housing market make paying more nearly impossible and put them at risk of becoming homeless.
If the rent increases, I may not be able to pay my college tuition, and I will have to be able to go to a different college just so I can support my family.
What it means is I have to start making sure that I don't eat as much as I do.
But small landlords say they're struggling too.
With the increases in our real estate taxes, our increases in insurance, increases in water, increases in our utilities, everything has gone up.
The Rent Stabilization Association, which represents landlords, says most rent-stabilized apartments are mom and pop owned properties passed down through generations, and that both landlords and tenants need help.
There needs to be more to address the problems of tenants and property owners. Frankly, nobody was ever going to be happy with the results of this board.
And there's Katie Corrado. Thank you so much for that. And Layla Pepe is here. I hope I said your name right. Oh, she's
nobody ever does. Don't worry about it.
Such a TV, Facebook name, I should say. Senior staff attorney. We're so happy to have you answering our questions live. So many people have so many questions. The first question was, there's no reversing this. This is a done deal, right, Layla?
This is a done deal. This was the final vote for what the order is going to be for this year. Yeah.
When does that take effect? Again, it's rent-stabilized apartments, but when does it take effect?
Well, it would take effect when someone was renewing their lease, and the year for the order starts in October. So if you're renewing your lease between the end of I think, sorry, I'm a little bit confused on the exact date, but I believe that it would wind up being October of 2022, that when your lease is renewed at that point, that's when this order would be in effect.
And we're already getting a lot of angry comments about this. If we can pull some of those up for you already, take a look. Gypsy Love says, the crazy part is that they do not maintain these buildings. Good point, Gypsy. No renovation, no cleaning, no fixing repairs. You cannot be serious. Now, on the other hand, I hear from small landlords all the time saying they are being crunched by inflation and cost of living, and they need this increase, and that this wasn't enough. Princess is saying, it's just insane. I have to move to New Jersey. I'm just so exhausted and overwhelmed. We hear you. And Angelica Vargas says, so the cost of living needs to increase. You can't expect people to live like this. So I guess, there is a balance here. And I'm sure that's what the board was thinking. But I mean, what can you tell someone who's watching this, who's maybe hearing it for the first time and saying there's no way they're going to be able to stay in the city?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I'd like to sort of do is flip the script on this story that we've been hearing about mom and pop landlords and small landlords, because I feel like that argument tends to be advanced. And the thing is that the Rent Stabilization Association defines small landlords or mom and pop landlords as landlords that own 20 units or fewer. So that's quite a lot of units, especially if you're talking about rent stabilized housing. Now, when we're talking about rent stabilized housing, we're talking about those buildings that have 6 or more units and were constructed before 1970 or 1974 or before.
Okay.
So when we're talking specifically about,
And it's not public housing, right? Not public
it's
housing.
not public housing. That's right. It's not city owned. There are a few regulatory exemptions that sort of bring other housing in, but generally these are apartments that are going to be these 6 unit or more buildings, 1974.
Thank you for that clarification, because we do want to be balanced, but you're saying, hey, it's for over 6 units. And sweetie,
Yes.
I hope we answered your question. This is not NYCHA. We have a very strong NYCHA public housing audience that we love. Joanne says, her rent is going up $90, but her salary isn't going up. So what do you tell people when you're advising them? Like, what can they do if their salaries aren't going up? See this, Joanne. Thank you for your comment. But the rent is going up.
Sure. Well, the first thing I always want to remind people is not to self-evict. There are people who see the rent going up and they just want to get out of there. It's really important to reach out for help before you get to that point. So, there are different things that people can do. One thing that I like to point out is if you are facing repair conditions in your apartment, there is something that you can do to freeze your rent. You can apply to the state agency. It's known as DHCR, the Division of Housing and Community Renewal. That's who sort of monitors rent stabilization. But it's a complaint-driven system, so they don't really know what you need or what's going on until there's a complaint. So it's a very simple form that you can fill it out online. You can also go to, if you call 311, you can probably get resources for their community-based offices where you can fill it out on paper. But basically, if there are conditions in your home that need repair, you can ask the DHCR to say that your rent can't go up from the last increase. Now, for the past couple of years where we've had a rent freeze, this hasn't been a very powerful tool because there hasn't been an increase. But now with such a large increase, this is actually a really powerful tool that could significantly, I think, help people.
That's such a good one. That is, we got to have that link somewhere. We'll make sure it's on this post. That's such a great. I love that. Let's talk numbers though, because I love how you said it's a large increase. Some people are saying, oh, it's not, doesn't sound like that much. But if someone's paying, let's talk numbers, $3,000 per month and their rent goes up 3%, it comes out to another $1,200 a year. That's a lot of money. And legally, can people be evicted if they're not able to pay the percentage increases? Great question from Amanda.
Yeah, so people can be evicted for non-payment of rent. And unfortunately, as we discussed, this is a permanent situation. So one tool is the rent reduction order, but that's not great because that only applies if you have bad conditions in your housing. So another tool that I'd like to call people's attention to is if there's someone in your household who's disabled or someone who's a senior, there's another rent freeze that you can apply for. That's called the SCREE or DREE exception. And again, calling 311 can get you hooked up with the resources to file that. But again, that's only for renters who have an income annually of 50,000 or under. There's a huge problem with renters in the middle who someone paying $3,000 rent is already heavily rent burdened. So it's really not a solution at all. The other thing, and I know this is really a last resort for a lot of people, but we do have the protected right to have a roommate in New York. So if you have a 2-bedroom or you have a 1-bedroom that is divided, if you're the tenant of record, you have the right to have a roommate and your landlord cannot evict you for having a roommate. So that's another way that people can try to make rent work.
These are great suggestions. I see a TV story in our future here that Joanna's on fire. Joanna's watching. Thank you for all of your fantastic comments. She's the one that said $90 a month, and her salary's not going up.
Yeah.
But she wants to know, why isn't there more tenant representation on the rent guidelines board? What a great question.
That's an excellent question, because tenant representation matters so much. That's the only way that we got those rent freezes in the past. Tenants speaking out is the way we got the 2019 changes in laws that were really positive for rent stabilized tenants. So, right now, the way it works is there are these 9 appointees. 2 are supposed to be for the landlord. 2 are supposed to be for the tenant side, and then 4 are supposed to be for the general public. But there's often a lot of problems with landlord bias in those 4 appointees. The mayor appoints these folks, and there's no vetting process. So, for example, if tenants, if tenants fought for there to be, for example, I've heard of the idea of, well, what if city council had to approve these? So more like with a presidential nomination, right? How the president can nominate someone, but then Congress has to approve it. If it was something more similar to that, then tenants could ensure that there were actual tenant advocates or more actual tenant advocates on the association.
So fascinating. And, we're already in a housing crisis right now. I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but what would you predict is going to happen because of this? I mean, starting October, what's going to happen? What do you predict?
The very sad thing is I do think that this is going to directly increase homelessness. People are already rent burdened. People are already crowded. People are already, having families meet up with families and taking on roommates and taking on additional jobs. There's just no way to meet this rent burden. And unfortunately, the market is really not self-correcting. The majority of the vacancies are actually in these really expensive apartments, and affordable apartments with low rents have very, very low vacancies. So my hope, my hope is that tenants can just make their voices heard, because tenants are the majority.
That's what this show is all about. And Elle, tell us what are you hearing?
Yeah, I'm looking at our social media and monitoring some of the comments. Stephanie talked about how she had to move to New Jersey just to sort of get out of the city and be able to afford her rent. Tammy says that for her, it's all about apartment conditions. And she writes, if you're going to raise the rent, please at least make the apartment a little bit more livable. And then we had an interesting question from Scott Kochman, who asked, since this only applies to rent stabilized apartments, what about the unregulated apartments? Could that rent go up even more than 3 or 5%?
Yes. Unfortunately, what an unregulated apartment means is that the rent can go up as much as the landlord wants it to. There have been bills. Unfortunately, the legislative session just ended without passing a bill that I think would have had a positive effect for unregulated tenants. It was a bill that would require good cause to evict an unregulated tenant, and that also would have required notice and an opportunity to contest large rent increases. It didn't pass this time, but that affects, if you're not rent stabilized and you're not in NYCHA, then that bill will certainly affect you. And so I encourage people not to give up and to keep to stay involved and stay engaged with these issues.
Really I'm interested too, because the city, and we have a new mayor. What would you suggest? I mean, there's a new political power in our city as well, and so knowing that we're in a housing crisis and that this is going to happen in October, and people have to brace themselves. What do you suggest? Like, what do you see happening? You said it is the public outcry and the public voice that usually creates change. So what do you suggest someone watching, that this extra money that they're going to have to pay, whether it's out of their food income for their family, clothes for their children, what do you suggest? What do you think should happen politically?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that an important thing is that people not feel shame about this. People feel a lot of shame about not being able to afford their basic needs. And it's so important that people stay vocal about this, right? Because when you're vocal, that's when people have to listen to you. That's when politicians have to listen to you. I encourage people to, to speak with their neighbors. There are a lot of wonderful community-based organizations that do, that work with tenants to try to come up with legislative solutions. And so I really encourage people to get involved with these. It's really, it really does make a difference. Again, just citing back to 2019, tenants won a huge victory that really changed the face of litigating non-payment cases. And what it was a change that they won to the rent, primarily to the rent stabilization code, also to some other rent rent and housing related laws. But
Well, Lila, one more time, can you give us the best resource link again one more time?
Sure. I'm going to actually recommend that people work with a nonprofit called Just Fix. Because it's a very user-friendly website. You can send your landlord a free certified letter complaining of a condition. You can request your rent history from DHCR. And you can also research your landlord. So it's a really valuable kind of one-stop shop.
I could listen to you all day. It was such a rich pieces of information that are very useful. And I love the suggestion too of maybe getting a roommate to, if you can do that as well. I love that. Again, justfix.com, a nonprofit that is just wonderful. We are so grateful to you. Maybe just a little bit of hope. What kind of hope can you give someone watching who, again, just is trying to balance their checkbook every month and it's not looking good?
I just remind people that they're not alone. Remind people that if they are facing eviction, I'd like to give out the number for my organization. The city council, because of tenants fighting for this, tenants won the right to counsel in eviction cases. So if you are being evicted, it's very, very important that you assert that right. If you're being the court system is overwhelmed. They're trying to push people forward without attorneys. So it's really, unfortunately, falls on the tenant to say, no, I have the right to an attorney. Do not put my case forward. Assign me an attorney. I need an attorney. Just keep repeating that, because having an attorney can, even if your case is pretty bad, having an attorney can still improve the outcome.
It's so true. That's why we love you so much. Thank you, Lila, so much for being on. You'll come back again. I would love to do a TV story as well. I have to say, we get so many emails from you on Facebook. Our Facebook audience for years has really been, front and center when it comes to dictating the news coverage that we do on Pix 11. And we hear from you and we cover the stories you want to hear, especially in housing. And we are in a housing crisis and this is happening. So what can you do? We're here for you. And we've got Lila coming back. Hopefully we'll do another extensive story on Pix 11 covering this continual coverage just for you. But you can always reach out to us at monica@pix11.com or on any of my social media platforms. Pix 11, of course, has this fantastic Facebook page. And we have the show at 4 o'clock now and at 5:55. We are making it happen. Send us your videos, send us your stories if you need repairs, but also tell us about your frustrations, about your housing. We want to hear from you. And we'll make sure to have all those resources linked to this fantastic show. Thank you, Elle and Amanda, my fantastic producers, and Julie, too. We're making it happen. Have a good night.